أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف المرسلين وعلى صحبه أجمعين ومن اتبع لسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فأقول لكم يا أيها الإخوة والأخوات السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I greet you with the greeting of Islam, which is to say, may the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon you. After that, inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to invoke blessings and peace upon His Messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, al-Hashimi, al-Arabi, al-Adani, al-Ismaili, al-Arabi, al-Qurayshi. Yes, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send His peace and blessings upon His final messenger, who is Muhammad, and upon his companions, and upon his family, and upon all those who follow his guidance until the day of judgment. Amma ba'd. Now, as the word proceeds, inshallah, we continue with our lessons of Mukhtasar al-Akhdari, the abridgement of Imam al-Akhdari, and morals, purification, and prayer. We're well past the section on morals. We're well past the section on purification, and we are deep into the section on the prayers. Specifically, we're in the Babun fi Sahwi, the chapter on forgetfulness. So here he details in quite a bit of detail how someone should rectify their prayer if they happen to make some type of mistake due to forgetfulness. And he mentioned to us in the last lesson that forgetfulness is of two types. Either you can omit something, which is nasyu, you forget something, you omit something, or naqs, you omit something, or you do a ziyada, you add something to the prayer that you're not supposed to add, and they both happen forgetfully. You understand? If they both happen forgetfully, then there's a way to rectify it. So he explained that for omissions, you should, especially omissions, specifically for omissions that relate to the sunnahs of the prayer, you should prostrate before the last salamu alaikum. And for additions, whether they're sunnah or whether they're fard, that you accidentally added, then you should prostrate after the salamu alaikum. And if you were to add and omit something, you would prostrate before the salamu alaikum. And he mentioned that it's not enough when it comes to a fard, an obligatory act, to simply prostrate. That if you omit an obligatory act, you'll have to come with that obligatory act and then still prostrate. So inshallah today he's going to go deeper into this chapter. He's sleeping, Amita, he's sleeping. So inshallah today he's going to go deeper into this chapter of the Babun fi Sahwi, the chapter on forgetfulness. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. He says ولا يكون السجود القبلي إلا لترك سنتين فأكثر. He said there should be no prostration of forgetfulness before the salam. Remember, we said the sujood is of two types when it comes to rectifying the mistakes. Qabliyu wa ba'diyu. Qabliyu means before the salamu alaikum, and ba'diyu is after the salamu alaikum. And he explained to you the last lesson how you would perform them. He said that you would not prostrate before the salamu alaikum except if you left off two or more sunnahs. If you left off one sunnah, then it's okay. You don't have to prostrate. Understand? He says, وَأَمَّا السُنَّةُ الْوَاحِدَةُ, and he goes into that. He says, now as for just one sunnah that you leave out, he says, فَلَا سُجُودَ لَهَا, then there's no sajda for it. There's no prostrating for it. إِلَّا السِّرَّ وَالْجَهْرَ, except for the sunnah of reciting secretly and the sunnah of reciting openly. Meaning those are such strong sunnahs within the prayer that if you leave them out, you should prostrate. Whether you add them or you omit them. If you add them, you perform the prostration after. So he says, وَأَمَّا السُنَّةُ الْوَاحِدَةُ فَلَا سُجُودَ لَهَا إِلَّا السِّرَّ وَالْجَهْرَ. Now as for a single sunnah that you leave out, he said there's no prostration for it except for as-sirr wal-jahr, meaning in the prayer there's times where you recite secretly, meaning you recite silently, wal-jahr, and there's times where you recite openly. If you omit one of those sunnahs or you add one of those sunnahs accidentally, meaning you recite out loud where you're supposed to recite silently, or you recite silently where you're supposed to recite out loud, then you would make the necessary prostration for that, even if that's the only sunnah that you made a mistake there for. You understand? Excuse me. He says, فَمَنْ أَصَرَّ فِي الْجَهْرِ. He said, whoever recites silently in the place where he's supposed to recite openly. For example, when the Fajr prayer is supposed to recite openly, and you recite silently. Silently is when you recite to the extent where you can't even hear yourself. where you move your tongue but you can't hear yourself, where all you can feel is the movement of your tongues. But if you can, even if it's quiet, you can be quiet, but still in a state, but still jahratan, but still reciting openly. It's just quiet. You understand? Quiet and silently is not the same thing. He says, فَمَنْ أَصَرَّ فِي الْجَهْرِ, whoever recites silently fil jahri, and a place that where he's supposed to recite openly, he says, سَجَدَ قَبْلَ السَّلَامِ, then he would prostrate before the salamu alaikum, because he's omitted a sunnah, right? So he's omitted the sunnah of reciting out loud, right? So he's omitted the sunnah, so he'd prostrate before the salamu alaikum. He says, وَمَنْ جَهَرَ فِي السِّرِّ, whoever recites openly in a place where he's supposed to recite silently. For example, during Salatul Dhuhr, you decide to just recite loudly, right? Sajada ba'da salam, then that person would prostrate after the salamu alaikum, because he's added a sunnah where he's not supposed to add a sunnah. He says, وَمَنْ تَكَلَّمَ سَاهِيًا, whoever speaks forgetfully, meaning whoever forgives due to inattention. You understand? Meaning he's being inattentive. Sahiyan, sahwan, meaning he's being inattentive, then he would sajada ba'da salam, then that person would prostrate after the salamu alaikum, because he forgetfully added something to his prayer. You understand? He says, وَمَنْ سَلَّمَ مِنْ رَكَعَتَيْنِ سَاهِيًا sajada ba'da salam. He said, whoever says salamu alaikum after 2 rak'ahs, say after Asr or Dhuhr or Maghrib or Isha, that you're supposed to get up after the second rak'ah, but instead of getting up, you do assalamu alaikum and you realize it, then you would go back to your prayer, you would finish your prayer, and then you would prostrate after the salam, because once again you added something to your prayer that you're not supposed to add. He says, وَمَنْ زَادَ فِي الصَّلَاةِ رَكْعَةً أَوْ رَكْعَتَيْنِ سَجَدَ بَعْدَ السَّلَامِ. He says, whoever adds in his prayer a rak'ah, an entire cycle, أو ركعتين, or 2 entire cycles, sajada ba'da salam, that he would prostrate after the salamu alaikum, because once again he is added something to the prayer. It's not supposed to be there. He says, وَمَنْ زَادَ فِي الصَّلَاةِ مِثْلَهَا بَطْلَتْ. Whoever adds the same amount of rak'ahs as the prayer is, then his prayer is invalid. So for example, if somebody is praying Fajr and he accidentally adds 2 rak'ahs, and he makes it 4-2-2, then his prayer is invalid. Maghrib, if he adds 3-3-6, it's invalid. If he accidentally adds 4 to Dhuhr or Asr or Isha, then his salah becomes invalid. Understand? But if it's not for that, if he accidentally adds 1 rak'ah or something that's not a double of the prayer that he's praying, then he just prostrates after the prayer for adding something to the prayer. He says, وَمَنْ شَكَّ فِي كَمَالِ صَلَاتِهِ, whoever has doubts with respects to the completeness of his prayer, أَتَى بِمَا شَكَّ فِيهِ, he comes with what causes him doubt, meaning he comes with whatever obligations that causes him doubt. You understand? He's, for example, if he feels like I didn't do Fatiha in my first rak'ah, then he would pray. He would treat every rak'ah like the one that's before it. So he would treat his 3rd rak'ah like his 4th rak'ah, and then he would stand up and he would recite Fatiha, and then he would go back to sitting, and then he would say Assalamu alaikum. He would do the tashahhud, and then he would say Assalamu alaikum, because he forgot something. You understand? He says, وَالشَّكُّ فِي النُّقْصَانِ كَتَحَقُّقِهِ. He says to have shak, to have doubt in the omission of something, is you treat it as though it actually happened. So if I have doubt that I left off a sunnah, then I would just treat it as though I left it off. You understand? He says, فَمَنْ شَكَّ فِي رَكَعَةٍ أَوْ سَجْدَةٍ. Whoever has a doubt with respects to an entire rak'ah, أو سجدة, or prostration, أتى بها, that he brings that particular act, or a Fatiha, whatever the case might be, whatever it is, he brings that specific act, he performs that act, وَسَجَدَ بَعْدَ السَّلَامِ, and then he would prostrate after the Assalamu alaikum. He says, وَإِن شَكَّ فِي السَّلَامِ. He says, if he has doubts about whether he said Assalamu alaikum or not, which is an obligation of the prayer, he says, سَلَّمَ إِن كَانَ قَرِيبًا. Then he would say Assalamu alaikum if he's close to the prayer time. If he's close to the prayer that he just finished. وَلَا سُجُودَ عَلَيْهِ, and there will be no sajda upon him. وَإِن طَالَ. But if it's a long time that goes by and he feels like, I didn't say Assalamu alaikum, he left the masjid or 30 minutes went by, then he would just redo his prayer. But his prayer would be invalid. He says, وَالْمُوَسْوِسُ يَتْرُكُ الْوَسْوَسَ مِنْ قَلْبِهِ. He says the person that has whisperings, meaning the person that has OCD, excessive whisperings, are always in excessive doubt. يترك, he leaves off الوسوسة من قلبه, that he ignores the waswa that's in his heart. He acts as though, it has no relevance. Whatever he has a doubt about, he just treats it as though it's not relevant. This is for the person that has waswas. Because if he was to give into that, he would spend 24 hours of the day praying one prayer. There's some people that are like that. ولا يأتي بما شك فيه, and he would not come with what causes him doubt. ولكن يسجد بعد السلام, but he would prostrate after the salamu alaykum. سواء شك في زيادة أو نقصان, whether or not his doubt is with respect to adding something or leaving off something. You understand? Inshallah. He says, وَمَنْ جَحَرَ فِي الْقُنُوتِ فَلَا سُجُودَ عَلَيْهِ وَلَكِنَّهُ يُكْرَهُ عَمْدُهُ. You understand? وَلَا يُكْرَهُ عَمْدُهُ. He says, the one that says the qunut, the dua al qunut out loud, and the Maliki madhab during the Fajr prayer after the last rak'ah, meaning after you come up from the last ruku', you understand? Or after you finish the last fatih. It can happen in either of those two places. Either before you go into the ruku' or after you say Sami Allahu liman hamida, you recite the dua al qunut, which you recite it silently during the Fajr prayer. He says that whoever recites this out loud, he says there's no sajda upon him, but nonetheless it's disliked to do this on purpose. He says, وَمَنْ زَادَ السُّورَةَ فِي الرَّكْعَتَيْنِ الْآخِرَتَيْنِ فَلَا سُجُودَ عَلَيْهِ. He says whoever adds a rak'ah in the last two rak'ahs, and there's surahs in the last two rak'ahs, right? A surah in the last two rak'ahs. For example, you're praying Asr, or you're praying Dhuhr, or you're praying Isha. In the last two rak'ahs, you're not supposed to recite a surah after Fatiha. But he says that if you do add a surah after Fatiha, there's no sajda upon you. He says, وَمَنْ سَمِعَ ذِكْرَ مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. Whoever hears the name of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم outside of the prayer, وَهُوَ فِي الصَّلَاةِ, but he happens to be in the prayer, meaning he hears somebody mention the name of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, فَصَلَّى عَلَيْهِ, and then he says صلى الله عليه وسلم, he says فَلَا شَيْءٍ عَلَيْهِ, then there's nothing upon him. سَوَاءٌ كَانَ سَاهِيًا, whether he does this forgetfully, أو عَامِدًا, or he does it by intent. أو قائما, whether he does it while he's standing, whether he's reciting Fatiha or something, or saying Sami Allahu liman hamida, أو جالسا, or whether he's sitting down in between the two sajdas, or he say the tashahhud. ومن قرأ سورتين فأكثر في ركعة واحدة أو خرج. He says ومن قرأ سورتين, whoever recites two surahs, meaning after Fatiha, فأكثر, or more than that, في ركعة واحدة, in a single rak'ah. He said أو خرج من سورة إلى سورة, or he goes from one surah to another surah, meaning he goes from the middle of Baqarah and then he goes to Ali Imran, for example. أو ركعة قبل تمام السورة, or he just says Allahu Akbar and goes to ruku' before he finishes the surah that he's in. فلا شيء عليه في جميع ذلك. Then there's nothing wrong with all of that. Meaning that you can recite whatever is easy from you in the Quran. You can go from one surah to another surah. You can do half a surah. You can do a whole surah. You can do two surahs. You understand? There's nothing wrong with it. He says, وَمَنْ أَشَارَ فِي صَلَاتِهِ بِيَدِهِ أَوْ رَأْسِهِ فَلَا شَيْءً عَلَيْهِ. The one that points with his hand or with his head during salah, to like say somebody says, where's the key? And you point over there, right? Or somebody says, where's the baby? And you tilt your head, he's over there. There's nothing upon you in that situation. He says, وَمَنْ كَرَّرَ الْفَاتِحَةَ سَاهِيًا سَجَدَ بَعْدَ السَّلَامِ. He says the one that repeats the Fatiha, forgetfully, meaning that he repeats the Fatiha again after what he was supposed to, the one he's supposed to do, سَجَدَ بَعْدَ السَّلَامِ. He says he does sahi, and he does it forgetfully, then he would prostrate after the Assalamu alaikum. He says, وَإِنْ كَانَ عَامِدًا فَالظَّاهِرُ الْبُطْلَانِ. If he does that deliberately, meaning he recites Fatiha again in his prayer, he said then the clear opinion is that his prayer is invalid. You understand? Okay, so inshallah we'll end today's lesson here. جزاكم الله خير يا إخوان. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.